Up an Asia program. As some of you know, we do a small forum on China. We do one on India. We're developing one, we hope, on Japan. And we've made a pretty significant commitment to both developing our own staff and also our networks in that part of the world. One of the areas that I've been spending a lot of time over the last 2 years is Japan. We have for the last 3 years been having a very good delegation from Japan here for these meetings. Some people have been to a number of our other meetings as well. And we were just very pleased after the tragic events in Japan that so many of our Japanese friends are still here. We thought it would be especially useful to have a session today to give everyone a very clear assessment and read on where things are and what the implications are. And we've asked our own Bruce Stokes, Transatlantic Fellow at GMF and also a well-known journalist, to moderate the discussion. So Bruce, why don't you bring your panel out and get underway?
Thank you, Craig, and I'd like to welcome you all to this session on Japan, the Aftershocks. The quake that struck Japan March 11th, the ensuing tsunami, and the nuclear crisis that has befallen Japan after that has, I think we all would agree, is a disaster of almost biblical proportions. Almost at every turn when you thought it can't get worse than this, it has. The official death toll is near 10,000. I think everyone believes it's going to be much higher than that. And we've all, and I think we want to express this to our Japanese friends on our panel in the audience, that we've been deeply moved by this tragedy, by the horrible suffering of the Japanese people, and by the challenges that this poses for Japanese society going forward, both on a personal level for our Japanese friends, but also for Japan as a community, as it attempts to rebuild its towns, rebuild its families, and recover its national purpose and direction. I think I would say we've also, in the West, been moved by the Japanese fortitude that we have seen. This, what the Japanese call their fighting spirit. There is a willingness to persevere that I think is an inspiration to us all around the world. And I think the world stands ready to help the Japanese as individuals and as our governments and societies to help them rebuild and recover from this tragedy. Yet I think it's also appropriate that we, as in this panel, talk about some of the broader implications for the world, for Asia, for ourselves as allies with Japan, in terms of how Japan is changed by this and what it means for the global community. You know, what are the strategic implications of Japan's role as a leader in its own region, but also around the world, on everything from North Korea to China to economic development, where Japan has been a leader for many, many years. What are both the short-term and the long-term economic implications when one of the largest economies in the world, albeit one that was not very healthy to begin with when this hit, what does it mean for the world economy when Japan suffers such an economic setback? And what are the implications for nuclear power? Japan was deeply committed to nuclear power. And what are the knock-on effects for the demand for natural gas around the world, for the demands for oil and renewable energy, which will have ripple effects all over the world? To shed more light on these topics and to engage with you all in a conversation about the knock-on effects, we have with us a very distinguished panel. We have to my left, on stage right, Ambassador Masafumi Ishii, who is the Ambassador for Policy and Planning and International Security Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tokyo. We have in the center Dr. Yorizumi Watanabe, an old friend, professor of international political economy at Keio University. And I would like to say personally, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us about this issue. I know that in your own families and in your own work, these are very, very demanding times. And we have Jean Pisani-Ferry with us, the director of Bruegel, one of the most influential think tanks here, economic think tanks here in Brussels, to talk about some of the broader implications for Europe and the U.S. and the global economy. I'd like to start, if I could, by asking a question of Ambassador Ishii. Ambassador, do you think that this crisis will transform Japan, much as the arrival of the black ships did in the mid-19th century, much as the oil crisis in 1979 helped transform Japan? Will Japan find a new inner strength in the wake of this crisis and show new leadership in the world and leadership on its own issues? Or is there a danger that Japan will turn inward, understandably preoccupied by its crisis and these overwhelming problems that it faces?
Thank you for the question. My short answer is yes. I think it will have to change us, but we need to face with a lot of difficult choices. First, I need to say thank you to the leadership of the GMF for making this session happen. We are doubly thankful. And my thanks also goes to every one of you. The support, goodwill, in-kind donation, it's overwhelming. I think more than 130 countries and areas, more than 30 international institutions came to us with substantial help. And thank you very much for that. I have no intention to understate the severity of this crisis. It's very severe. As Bruce said, number who are confirmed dead is now more than 10,000. Those who are missing is more than 17,000. We lost like a 25 trillion Japanese yen, which means 300 billion US dollars by this one shot. But I think we are not that pessimistic either. As Bruce indicated, we have a history of recovery. You don't have to go that back to the history, to the black ship or something. Take the example of 1960s, where we had a lot of pollution. Japanese industry was known to be the dirtiest, most energy inefficient industry throughout 1960s and 70s. And we are hit by the oil shock towards the end of 1970. What happened? We came up with the state-of-the-art technology for the cleaner use of energy, more energy-efficient industry was created. This time it's not that easy, I think. We need to make a lot of attentive choices, whether we are going to open up our country for the real recovery or we try to take care of the domestic concern, immediate concerns. Are we ready to do more on ODA, participation in peacekeeping operation after receiving all these goodwills? And I think my personal sense is yes, I think we should. And it's like a spirit of yes, we can type. So we are facing with a lot of difficulties. We are still shaken, but we still keep a stiff upper lips, if you will. And then we are determined to come back.
Professor Watanabe, I'd like to drill down on one particular issue I know that you've done some work on and thought about. Before this crisis, the Khan government was committed to deeper engagement with the global economy. This was one of his signature issues. In fact, Prime Minister Khan hoped to involve Japan in the negotiations for a trans-Pacific partnership that would involve the United States, Australia, and other countries in the southern Pacific, and to use the economic reforms that would be required of Japan to join that negotiation as a way of transforming Japan's domestic economy and I dare say reinvigorating Japan's democracy in the process. Do you think that's still possible, and do you think it's a good idea, still a good idea?
Well, Bruce, thank you very much indeed for highlighting this TPP, because TPP is a real challenge for Japan. And, just before getting into TPP story, I'd like to touch upon Japanese FTA policy, first of all, just to give you some idea, because I don't know the audience to what extent they are familiar with that. Japan, started its FTA, what we call Economic Partnership Agreement, and its abbreviation is EPA, started in 2001, first with Singapore. And then now we have 11 countries in the region, ASEAN as a region. We have a dozen of EPA already in force. And actually, we are now also negotiating such countries as Australia and GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and also Peru. We have recently concluded our negotiation with India. So altogether, about 16 countries in the region that we have been negotiating our EPAs. And TPP will provide certainly the more enhanced sort of platform for promoting our FTA policies. So when our Prime Minister Kan mentioned that Japan will be very much seriously consider the possibility of joining the TPP, I think the business community in particular, they certainly welcome this new sort of drive onto more robust type of FTA. So I think having this background of a dozen of EPA already in place, I think TPP was a kind of logical sequence that we should follow. Because you see what I would call the first generation FTA EPAs have been almost completed. Now we are getting into a more ambitious package such as TPP. So I think the TPP will certainly provide Japan for a very good basis for recovery.
Is the will there now after the earthquake to do
well,
this?
You see, this is still premature to say yes to that question. But things have been quite in preparation since 2001, 2002, for almost a decade. And it is not really the thing that we can stop. So there could be two possibilities. You see, the earthquake and tsunami stricken area is heavily concentrated on the agriculture. And there's a lot of rice pad. And also, the dairy products and fishery products, all those agricultural products have been produced in that area. So one school of thought might be like that. You see, since this is a stricken area, we have to give priority to the recovery of those fishery agricultural sector first. So let's wait for a moment for TPP. Second way of thoughts is that this is a good occasion since the rice pad has been inundated by seawater. So it might take some time to make it more arable, appropriate for agriculture purposes. Maybe it takes 1 year or two. And also, because of this radiation of the nuclear plant, people are now hesitating buying those spinach and other Chinese shoes and all that. So actually, we have to import agricultural products, and we have to either lower or reduce the duty rates or even eliminate the duties on some of the agricultural products in order to feed the people. So maybe this could give us a good occasion to review our agriculture policy and our agriculture tariffs that we impose.
Jean, this brings us to economics. And two questions. Morgan Stanley now predicts that the Japanese economy will shrink 1% to 3% this year. It's a much more negative prediction than I think the normal narrative had been right after the crisis. And this is a fair shift because they'd been predicting it was going to grow by 2%. Does this blow to the Japanese economy imperil global economic recovery in any way? And a second question is, the earthquake and the tsunami and the subsequent power outages have disrupted global supply chains. Toyota now says that they think production will drop by 5% this year in Japan. Have we built an interconnected global economy that's too vulnerable to disruption? I mean, clearly the supply chains we build up were very economically efficient, but are they also sustainable given acts of God that we can't control?
Well, obviously, estimates are being revised as time goes by, and people figure out what are the channels of transmission. The initial view was that it was a region whose economic weight in Japan was very small, 4% of GDP, and whatever would happen to 4% of the Japanese GDP, it was trivial from a global point of view, which was evidently correct. Now, that's a demand channel. The more serious, more problematic channel is a supply channel, which affecting production in Japan, so either directly because of the destruction or indirectly because of a reduction in electric power, or possibly because of contamination and the way it is going to affect production and ability to export, is going to have effects throughout Asia, because Japan is a major supplier of production networks in the whole of East Asia. That Japan is the country that is probably the most engaged in this kind of decomposition of the value chain with partners throughout East Asia. And so if some critical supplies are not available, then it may affect supply chains. Now, I think it's very difficult to assess. What I would say is that we had an experience before with global supply chain. That was 9/11. And 9/11, everybody said, the fact that air traffic was interrupted for a week, that changes significantly the way production should be organized. In reality, I don't think there was much change afterwards. So I think this resilience of this production system, the ability to shift production, to reorganize, shouldn't be underestimated. Now, what I think are the most important consequences is probably the reassessment of risk, of the way we're dealing with risk, of the nuclear risk in particular, and the effect it's going to have worldwide, the effect on choices, on policy choices. In some respects, a lot of analogy can be drawn between this crisis and the financial crisis. It's all about management of tail risk and the choices we're making, and also through clearly the energy mix and consequences for climate, which obviously can have major consequences in the medium term.
Ambassador Ishii, we've brought up the issue of electricity, and TEPCO now estimates that electricity supply all over Japan may be down by 15% this summer when it's needed for cooling and so forth. Japan has a deep commitment to nuclear power as a supplier of electricity. Is that prudent economically to continue that dependence with the potential knock-on effect of when there's a crisis, it goes off grid? And is the commitment, and maybe a more profound question, is the commitment in Japan to nuclear power politically sustainable now?
I may not be the right person to ask that question to, but to put the figures right, we're not talking about 2 or 3% of electricity. We are talking about 30%, 30% of electricity coming from nuclear. 15% of primary energy supply comes from nuclear. Of course, after this, we have to make a pause, look into all the available possibilities, make a political decision. And it's far premature to say which way it will go. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the day, answer would be, okay, we need to stick to this. Mm-hmm. Because we are talking about 30% of it. And the other side of the coin is that nowadays we have an occasional loss of power even in Tokyo, because that reactors in Fukushima supplies electricity to Tokyo, not to the northern part of Japan. I think that reminded people of the degree we depend on nuclear energy and the loss we are going to have if we stop the nuclear energy. So I think there are many elements in front of the public to start a debate, and we need to do a debate. But even if we decide to restart it, I think we do need a much, much higher sort of safety standard, security standard. And for your information, earthquake itself was within our expectation. Earthquake didn't destroy the reactor. Tsunami did. Tsunami was much more than we expected. So we have to be mindful of that if we decide to continue to do this in future.
Thank you. I'd now like to turn to the audience. I would ask you if I could, when we recognize you, if you could identify yourself, keep your question or statement brief so that we can get as many in here in the time allotted. And it would be useful if you could, if it's possible, direct your question at one of the three panelists so they don't all feel compelled to answer every question. And what I'll try to do is bunch 2 or 3 questions together to move this along. So who would like to go right here in the front? Yes.
Thank you, Josh Walker from the German Marshall Fund. I want to direct this to our Japanese participants. We've talked about the international, we've talked about the domestic slightly. You mentioned that it's too soon to tell. What I want to focus on is the regional. We haven't talked about it, but it seems to be the elephant in the room. When we think about the disaster that happened, a lot of us that are optimists, maybe eternally so, think about the term earthquake diplomacy. Is this an opportunity for that? I was a little bit disheartened to see that the Chinese government pulled out most of its citizens quicker than almost anybody else. Is there an opportunity because of the sympathy that is there to kind of strengthen cooperation? Because economically, this region of the world is the most interdependent, but politically you see the biggest problems. What type of opportunity do we see in a disaster like this? Thank you.
Over here.
Robin Nibbler, Chatham House. We've talked already in your presentations about Japan's EPA strategy, regional trade agreements. Prior to this crisis, Japan had been really quite interested in trying to strike some type of deeper economic integration agreement with the European Union. And to my understanding, this has been kind of stuck for a while with interest on the Japanese side and not that much interest on the European Union side. How does this crisis potentially change that context? Is there any scope right now for pushing at this moment of emergency to try and make some type of real progress? And I'd be interested to hear both the Japanese perspectives and perhaps Jean Pisani-Ferry's view on this as well from inside the EU.
We'll take one more.
Thank you. Glyn Ford from Poland. I'd like to follow up on the last question about the EU-Japan FTA. We did see in the summit conclusions yesterday a reference to the possible EU-Japan FTA. The request really at the European end is there was a feeling that Japan was not prepared, if you want, they were in favour in principle, but you were not going to be able to deliver the line ministries to make the concessions on non-tariff barriers. Is that changed post the three disasters? And a follow-up, which is on the reaction from the European Union. We've all said the nicest things about Japan, and rightly so too. But if we look around at certain member states, the Netherlands, Spain, France and Germany, they're doing things like checking cars that were made 3 months ago and imported to Europe to see if they're radioactive. They're telling dock workers in the Netherlands not to be careful opening containers. Do you not feel there's a slight contradiction here between, if you want, the public rhetoric on how much we're being solidarity with Japan and the reality on the ground?
Okay, we'll start maybe with Ambassador Ishii. You could talk a bit about the practicalities of, does this lead to more regional cooperation, or at least the opportunities, but also if you could address why it may not. If regional cooperation were simple, we probably would have done it already, and why would this crisis make it any different?
As Joshua sort of hinted, there is a huge opportunity for improving our relation. At least there's a breathing place for us. You know, the assistance came not only from China. Of course, EU has given a very substantial assistance, thank you. But actually some donation came from North Korea through a Red Cross channel. That shows the level of goodwill around the world. So we do have a breathing space. And actually, another interesting perspective is the Japanese people are once again reminded of the willingness as well as the muscle United States has in the region, particularly of the United States force in Japan. You know, they have brought in 20,000 soldiers, 40 airplanes, including helicopters, 14 vessels, including salvage. You know, they are salvaging a lot of ships in order to make the usage of port possible again. So I think I'm not saying this solves the base issue we're having with the United States, but I think the affinity level towards the United States, U.S. force in Japan is higher than ever. I think that's going to work as an asset. And of course, there is also a clear intention and determination on the part of all the ASEAN countries and Asian countries to do more for disaster relief. I think this may sound a joke, but 2 days after this earthquake happened, I flew to Indonesia. What I did was to co-host natural disaster exercise organized by ARF, co-hosted by Indonesia and Japan. Scenario was big earthquake and tsunami. It sounds like a joke. But I think after we did that, we are determined to make that regular. By the way, EU sent a strong medical team, Italians, French. So I think we have a chance for closer coordination, cooperation over natural disaster. That has become the main agenda for the coming ASEAN-related meetings. So I think there are many opportunities in front of us if we pursue this with a sort of flexible mind.
Mr. Watanabe and Jean, I'll ask you both to address the EU FTA question, if you could. Professor Watanabe, do you anticipate that this will enhance the ability of the Khan government to get, as you so eloquently said, some of the various ministries to get in line here? We won't mention what ministry is probably number one in that category, but you all ate lunch recently. And Jean, the question I think would be whether or not it's a good idea, how can the EU say no if Japan asks in the wake of this crisis? So,
Bruce, before dealing with this EU-Japan thing, I'd like to also address to the Joshua's question. May I?
Yes, sure. Yeah, quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. This very tragic incident reminded us of the fact that East Asia region is the region mostly affected by natural disasters. The 70% of the all disasters happened in East Asia. And 84% of the all casualties also in East Asia. So that means that Japan is not the only country that could be severely attacked by or hit by this kind of natural disaster. So you remember, there was Aceh earthquake and also an earthquake that hit the Phuket beach, and many Australians, Americans, Europeans also been killed by the tsunami. And since then, Japan has been committed in developing a sort of early warning system. And Japan has been doing that, and Japan will do that in the future as well, bearing in mind this very severe experience. So Japan is not really going into the inward looking, but rather on the basis of this kind of very sad thing, we'd like to renew our commitments in establishing very solid system of early warning system or the technology transfers to the developing countries that could be affected by those natural disasters. So
and on the FTA, both of you, any thought on that?
Sure. After Jean.
Can you say no?
Well, I'm afraid we are in a competition between solidarity and fear. And I think the more time goes by, the more fear increases. And that's, we've been watching this cloud coming to Europe after having crossed the Pacific and the Atlantic and the U.S. territory, and it was making the news that the cloud was coming. I'm afraid we're going to check not only the car, but each and everything that comes from Japan. And I would be very, fearful of the consequences of this generalized fear about contamination. We saw that in the past about, all other things affecting public health. Immediately the reaction of public opinion and governments wanting to show that safety comes first, and so that they're ready to block, many flows for that. So perhaps, yes, the FDA, sometime down the road, but the immediate urgency would be to avoid that this fear, and this fear is still growing, continuously, that this has consequences that are disproportionate.
Ambassador, you want to jump in here?
I just want to talk about a bit about safety issue, and I think the key is base our action on the scientific fact and objective fact, and transparency is very important. I think we are slow in disclosing our information at the beginning, but I think we are now in full communication with IAEA. IAEA has sent a team. U.S. Nuclear Regulation Committee sent a team as well. They did their own monitoring. IAEA is going to send again the joint team of IAEA and FAO. And if you look through the homepage of IMO, for example, there are many cases where some of the ships they didn't want to make a port visit to Japan because those who were crew were afraid of the radiation. But IMO independently came up with a statement that you can base your decision on what is issued by Japan. We are saying it's safe, except for those areas, particular areas. It's safe, and port facilities are ready. So I think you may not believe what the Japanese government says. You may be able to believe what independent organization like IMO says.
I think it is interesting that one of the insights that we've gained from this crisis is that in a global economy, in a global media world, standards of transparency, which may differ from cultures, need to change, because I would say that some of the strongest critics of the Japanese government transparency was CNN. Now, whether they were right or wrong is maybe not an issue, but it was a hammering that was almost hourly on CNN during the crisis, and that obviously transforms the debate. Here, yeah.
Sorry for jumping in, but then maybe I'm the only person in this hall who has participated in a rescue team for Chernobyl. So in the first 2 months after the catastrophe happened. So, and I'm watching very carefully what is going on, and I have to express my high admiration how Japanese experts tackle the problem, the nuclear problem. I'm a little bit surprised that the word fear appears in your discussion, There's nothing to be feared. So, and I'm surprised by the international media that they're more focused on, not on the human catastrophe, on the natural disaster, which is a problem which needs solidarity, 100% solidarity, and we see this solidarity. But we should eliminate the fear, because every day we look in the Financial Times, you have a scheme of a nuclear reactor, and what might go wrong. And when I read the radiation is up 20 times, I'm sorry to say that's peanuts. That's nothing, It's not really, to be feared. And when we look at the iodine is higher, we have to tell the people and bring the whole iodine reserves and couplets to Japan, because it's easy. In 1 month, the iodine is gone. So I really admire the management, the high skillful management Japanese experts did. And we are on a safe side, because also the time showed that we are on a safe side. And we should really say it again, not talk about fear, not to bring up anxiousness about that something might happen. Nothing would happen. We need solidarity and the help.
Right here in front. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Center for European Studies, the foundation of the European People's Party. I'd also like to come into the nuclear topic, which seems to dominate the debate here. there were huge differences in the way this was reported even among the international media. And I may say that the German and Austrian media probably were the champions in panicking about this and emphasizing, almost praying for meltdown from day one, while BBC World and CNN were still reporting largely about the humanitarian catastrophe and the rescue efforts. So I think, having said this, I think one future task for Japanese public diplomacy might be to get into this European debate about nuclear energy, which is obviously taking place. I think Germany is a lost case because they're going out of nuclear altogether. This is not true for most of the EU countries. But you would be the excellent witnesses you have the street credibility, so to speak, to say, look, the consequence is we need to focus on security, on safety. We need to think about tail risk and rethink it. But there's no way we can completely get rid of it in the foreseeable next 10, 20, 30 years. And, to give us some of your fighting spirit, as Bruce called it in the beginning, And there's this beautiful Japanese proverb, nanakorobi yaoki. Falling down 7 times just means that you have to get up 8 times. And we could use some of that. Thank you.
Well, I have time for 2 more comments or questions here in the back. Yeah.
Nick Gowing from BBC World News. Picking up on the point you made about CNN, we have to express deep frustration about what was happening, certainly in the early hours. But I'd like to broaden it, partly because of the work that I do, which some of you know about handling information in crises, particularly in the public information space. And it seems to me there is an object lessons to be learned by how badly Japan has handled this. I'm struck, having been on a visit to Japan several years ago, to be told then that we were prepared to communicate everything to the public. And it seems to me every government and civil servant in this room can learn from the experience and the deficit, the negative message which was left by the inability to handle public information in the time immediately afterwards, because of the deficit of public confidence that was created and the way the public expect information in a crisis now. And I wonder if particularly the 2 Japanese panelists could just address this, because I think many of us were shocked at how little information was coming out, whether it came from the government or the cabinet secretary or the prime minister himself, and then what has happened with TEPCO. And obviously in a public space we can't be too rude about it, but it was extraordinary, given that there are many around the world who could face this with a WMD attack or whatever. And I just wonder, institutionally and culturally, what you have learned in the last 2 weeks about the high price to be paid by the institutions of government and in the corporate world from a failure to address this public information space.
And if I could amplify that a bit, it seems to me it's not just a question of how you handle information, but the knock-on effect of that, because the information was handled poorly. We all know the acronym in English, NIMBY, not in my backyard. All of these reactors, if they're ever to be reopened, or if there's any reactor that's now down in Japan and needs to be reopened, is going to have to require regulatory permission to reopen. That's a political process with political input. And I do think we need to raise the question whether any reactor that's not now working will ever be started again in Japan, despite the rational argument you make, Ambassador, that what else can we do? But for the individuals who live near to those plants, it may be a different question. I think it's appropriate our last comment and question come from one of our Japanese friends.
About the NIMBY phenomenon.
If you could introduce yourself.
Tomohiko Taniguchi from Tokyo, Japan. About the NIMBY phenomenon, Bruce, you mentioned, because of the NIMBY resistance, the TEPCO, the utility company, chose to build as many as 6 reactors in a single space. That exacerbated the danger even more, whereas in the case of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Islands, they were talking about only 1 single reactor. That aside, let me just shift the focus of the debate slightly to the TPP, because I was wondering if either one of the 2 panelists from Japan could tell us about what sort of strategic connotation this TPP is going to have. By the way, TPP has been made a signature policy by the United States over the last year or two, and come November this year, the United States is going to hold a APEC meeting, summit meeting in Hawaii, and that's going to be a high watermark for TPP to fly. And the Japanese government made a pledge that it was going to join the TPP framework. But TPP, if you look at it from outside, it is almost by design an assembly of like-minded countries that have something in common: democracy, maritime democracy, trading nations that cherish the global commons very much highly. And that may be one reason why there is one single country in the East Asian region that is very much sensitive about Japan joining TPP. So overall, you could perhaps tell us what sort of strategic implication you could draw from Japan trying to join this TPP.
Well, let me broaden that too, to say, I mean, does this crisis move Japan in a direction possibly towards the United States, possibly towards the West in general? Wouldn't necessarily have to, but it might. And also, if you could address the question of information and transparency in a global setting now, and make any final remarks any of you would like to make, because we do have to wrap it up then.
May I?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to take up the last question, the strategic meaning or implication of TPP. Well, TPP is supposed to go beyond present FTAs, including that of NAFTA and all other East Asian FTAs, as well as the overall WTO rules, because in the Doha round, we couldn't deal with the new area, such as trade and investment, trade and competition, and trade in the government procurement. So the TPP is a very right forum that we could discuss those WTO plus issues, such as competition, investment, and transparency in the government procurement. So in this way, we can go beyond the previously agreed WTO rules, and also more stringent sort of enforcement mechanism for intellectual property rights in the region of East Asia. That is really one of the most important issues involving in trade. So I think the TPP would have that kind of strategic meaning that could provide the more general framework to enhance the international trading community, particularly in the region of Asia Pacific, open for further transparency and also fair competition in the region.
Mr. Ambassador? John? Okay. Either one? John, you want to go first? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to react to what you said about eliminating fear. I would wish us to be able to do so. The question is that it is a matter of public opinion. And public opinion has many reasons to have, to lack trust for governments. I mean, this is a situation we're starting from. And for any government, the way it is managing risk ex ante and disaster ex post is an acid test in the eyes of the citizens, because this is when they discover whether the government is effective or not. This is an opportunity to test your government. So what does it mean for the Japanese government? It means the way it is managing this crisis will mean either it earns considerable political capital or it loses entirely, and we've seen that. I mean, remember Katrina, when the way it was managed, what it meant for the effectiveness, for the perception of the effectiveness of the government of the administration of George W. Bush. The same can happen, and whatever happens is determinant for the future. Because if you lost credibility totally and entirely, I mean, there is nothing you can do. If you earn credibility, you can invest it in a policy. Now, from the point of view of the government in the rest of the world, which have to do with the consequences, the cross-border effect, unfortunately, they're starting frequently from a very low base. Certainly in Europe, this is the case that many governments, are struggling with the lack of legitimacy. They're suffering from the financial crisis and the economic situation we're in. So I'm afraid the ability in this kind of situation not to go in the direction of the fear of public opinion is limited.
Mr. Ambassador, you have the last word.
Thank you. Let me first take up the issue of level of radiation. I think what Japanese government has done is set the 20 kilometers area where we asked all the people to evacuate. Now we set 20 to 30 kilometers area where we ask them to voluntarily leave their house. So all in all, within 30 kilometers, we are asking them to leave. And we are doing the regular monitoring of the radiation level along the area beyond 30 kilometers. And level has been lowered. Level has been within reasonable amount. And I think it's, to put it in perspective, it's like, 1/3 of the level of radiation which you get anyway throughout the year. So it's okay. And I think that has been confirmed by WHO as well. And WHO said that drinking water in Japan is okay to drink. So I don't want to finish this session with that kind of propaganda, but my only point is it's up to you to decide, of course. It's up to you to decide. You can have, it's up to the will of public. But I think if you have a time, if you will, look into the objective research fact. And I think that will be the key for sober reaction. Second point about information deficit. My answer comes after the break or something, but I think I think half was myth, half was true. I think when the tension of the report of CNN, NBC, and Fox and others was at its height, we are supplying information, but it didn't reach them. Partly our fault, partly I think it's what they did. And yes, we had a problem, and we will learn a lesson from the way we did. We are too good to cover the area we are supposed to cover. Our information is sometimes too deep to be understood by the public. And each ministry does that. Pile of paper, but what it means for the public is quite unclear. So it's up to the political leadership to pick up the right information, sort it out, and send the right sober message to the public. It wasn't done quite well at the beginning, I must admit. But I think it's being improved. And we will certainly look into the deficit we had. And then we'll try to improve for future. And thanks for that point. A bit of word about EPA, just a fact. Okay? There will be a Japan-EU summit meeting towards the end of May. And that is the time we are supposed to make a decision whether to start negotiation or not. We still have two more months. I think there will be a bit of discussions. And I'm sure this earthquake has some impact on the course of a discussion. There are many difficult issues, including, many difficult issues. Anyway, but I think the timing is set. And there's, at this moment, no intention whatsoever to postpone it. As for the TPP, Khan government set the date towards the end of June to come up with a decision whether to participate TPP or not. We haven't decided yet whether to participate or not. My impression is that the timeline may be a bit too tight for that because TPP is the one with the highest standard. We may have to delay that, but I think we simply cannot delay that too much because, as Taniguchi-san said, APEC is set already. So I think we need to make decisions on that sooner or later, even if that is not towards the end of June. My very last point is what's important happening after this earthquake is for the first time in the past 20 years or so, national consensus, what we can call national consensus, is emerging in Japan. I think that has been the most important problem we have been facing. Lack of national consensus, lack of the future goals. I think now it's getting clear. Reconstruction of our country, re-emerge, come back. So I think all the decision has to be made with that perspective. So there are many difficult choices, opening up or closing down, more contribution, less contribution. But I think there is a consensus building up that we need to make a decision based upon that perspective. And I think it's a daunting task for the political leadership. But I hope they can do it.
Mr. Ambassador, I think it's a very inspiring note to end this discussion. I would like to thank Ambassador, Professor Jean, for, I think, a very stimulating discussion. Again, our heartfelt condolences for the tragedy that Japan has felt, and we stand ready to help as people and as societies. We will now move, if my understanding is, to a coffee break. Is that right?
That's right.
Right.
Thanks,
Thank
Bruce. And thank you so much. It was really great. So we're going to take about a 25-minute break, and then we're going to come back and